All right, so for the afternoon start, we're going to start with a panel with the strategic initiatives in tribal forestry. And to moderate that will be Riley Smartlout. Riley is an enrolled member of the Confederated bands and tribes of the Yakama Nation. He currently serves as the timber management technician with Yakama Nation Tribal Forestry, where he supports a broad range of forest operations. So please help me welcome Riley.
Hey everybody, hope you guys are going to stay awake after all that lunch, like good food. So I'll just give a brief description of the session. It's going to spotlight 3 initiatives opening doors to careers for tribal youth throughout the nation. We have our Yakama Nation Tribal Youth Camp. Ali will present on that. And then we have Terry Baker of the Society of American Foresters and Brian Kalkowski with the college. So first up will be Alexandra Lister, and I'll give her bio real quick. Alexandra Lister is GIS forester for the Confederated Tribes of the Yakama Nation Tribal Forestry Field Management Program, where she supports wildfire mitigation and forest management through geospatial analysis and mapping. Prior to her current role, Alexandra worked as a research assistant in a fire ecology lab where she gained extensive field experience collecting and processing data on post-mega fire environments. She earned her bachelor's degree in geography with a minor in forestry from the Pennsylvania State University. So everybody welcome Alexandra Lister.
Shach pathway, iknak Modenishka Alexandra Lister, Natutas Iwanishka Andrew Lister, Naislas Iwanishka Tanya Lister, Tutkuchash Yakama Nation Fuels Management, Iwa, Nakuslas Iwanishka Charlotte Whitcomb, Napusas Iwanishka Barry Whitcomb. Hello everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Alexandra Lister, and my father's name is Andrew Lister. My mother's name is Tanya Lister. I work for Yakama Nation Fuels Management, and my grandmother's name on my mother's side is Charlotte Whitcomb, and my grandfather's name on my mother's side is Barry Whitcomb. So today I will be talking about Timni Nakdawishlamai Youth Camp, which is our tribal forestry youth camp. I work in the fuels management department under tribal forestry, Yakama Nation Tribal Forestry, as I mentioned earlier. And I'll be speaking on behalf of the Yakama Nation Tribal Forestry program today to discuss our tribal forestry youth camp with you all. This year, I've helped plan and coordinate our 2026 youth camp. However, youth camp is a collaborative effort, and Tony Sandoval is my co-coordinator, and she couldn't make it today, but she was responsible for planning the first 2 youth camps before me. I'm honored and excited to be here on behalf of Tribal Forestry, and I'm really excited to share some history and information about our youth camp with you all. So thank you so much for having me. Before beginning, I'd like to give you a brief overview of what you can expect from this presentation. So I'll start by introducing camp's purpose and vision, and then I'll get into the background and development of youth camp, which includes our funding and our collaborations. Next, I'll give camp overview, share some outcomes from 2025, discuss the current operational framework, some of our challenges, our 2026 program plan. Then I'll conclude by discussing the impacts and next steps. So to begin, the main goal of youth camp is to recruit future tribal forestry staff. So in recent years, we've noticed an overall decline in interest in natural resources. So just to give an example, tribal forestry has around 61 employees on the Yakama Nation, and we have the capacity to employ over 100 people. So youth camp is intended to give students in and surrounding the reservation exposure to forestry pathways. Much of our current staff come from generations of family members that have worked in forestry. So for example, one of our crew members, he has a father who is our crew boss, an uncle who works alongside him in the crew, and a grandfather who's worked over 20 years in tribal forestry and is now a councilman. So also both my parents work in forestry, so that's kind of how I got my exposure to forestry pathways. We recognize that kids don't know what they don't see. So we intentionally invite employees from a variety of positions with a variety of backgrounds so students can see these different pathways into forestry. Some careers, such as our crew positions, they can be entered directly after high school, and they provide a lot of opportunities for advancement through experience. Others, such as planning, GIS, and some higher level forestry technician positions, require specialized training or education. Tribal forestry even has internship programs. So Tony, the woman I mentioned earlier, she was actually a tribal forestry intern before she became a tribal forestry staff member. So that's another pathway. Using the knowledge of our staff, our goal is to help students seek a career path that fits both their aspirations and their own interests. So before getting into some of the implementation logistics for youth camp, I would first like to go over how youth camp came to be. So tribal forestry has three different programs. One is forest operations, one is fields management, and one is fire management. And our tribal forestry youth camp officially falls under the forest operations program. However, it's a big collaborative effort amongst the three programs. So, for example, as you can see in the picture on the slide, we have Dan Sims, who's also here today, and he works for fields management, and he's teaching students about tree identification. Before tribal forestry had their own independent youth camp, forestry education was taught at Yakama Nation's Camp Chaparral, which is an annual summer camp for tribal youth. And Camp Chaparral has been running since the 60s, and it has a long history of collaboration with a lot of different tribal programs. In the early 2000s, the Yakama Nation Wildlife Resource Program began a youth wilderness camp, and they invited tribal forestry to spend about 4 hours teaching forestry concepts to youth. However, during this experience, we learned that there's just so much forestry information to include in just 4 hours. So moving forward in 2012, the Yakama Nation became Sustainable Forestry Initiative certified for both forest management and fiber sourcing. And this means that SFI began to really highlight a lot of Yakama Nation's sustainable forest management practices that have been in practice for time immemorial. So becoming certified by SFI was really the beginning of an amazing partnership developed between tribal forestry and SFI, the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. Specifically, SFI has played a huge role in a lot of our forestry outreach initiatives. I do want to note, though, it's not essential for your program to be SFI certified in order to run a youth camp. We just use them as an incredible resource. After spending many years collaborating with other camps, and again realizing it's so hard to incorporate all of the forestry information into such a small time period, it was proposed in 2019 that tribal forestry develop its own youth camp where the entire focus surrounds forestry, fuels, and fire. So in December of 2019, the Pacific Education Institute, or the PEI, was invited by SFI's Senior Advisor of Indigenous Relations at the time, Paul Robitaille. And Paul met with the Yakama Nation's forestry manager, Tia Beavert, and timber resource manager, Doug Olney, to discuss opportunities for Yakama Nation forestry staff to be trained in communication of forestry concepts. The PEI then received an SFI community grant in 2019 to create the opportunity for tribal forestry staff to be trained by SFI's Project Learning Tree to communicate different forestry concepts to youth. And the workshops were centered around Project Learning Tree's focused on forests and green job curriculums. As we all unfortunately remember, the 2019 to 2020 era was incredibly horrible for doing anything in person. So the training was actually postponed to February 2021. So in 2021, the day-long training with Project Learning Tree took place, and tribal forestry staff had the opportunity to engage directly with Project Learning Tree content. In the picture labeled 2021 in the snow, we have Gladys, who was a bookkeeper for tribal forestry at the time, and she was working on earning her forestry degree, and she had the opportunity to participate in this training, which was an incredible experience for her that she's taken with her since. Later that year, in August of 2021, under the same SFI community grant, the Tribal Forestry Program hosted 10 educators from Central Washington schools, and I believe it was 4 middle school and 6 high school teachers, and they had the opportunity, the staff had the opportunity to apply their knowledge that they learned earlier that year and teach the teachers how to teach forestry-related content. The purpose of this training exercise was to expose teachers to forestry pathways, different forestry concepts, with the intent that they take it back to their classrooms and they highlight it for their students. After a really successful training in 2021, the forestry program began to plan their first ever tribal forestry youth camp. So our first youth camp was intended for students aged 13 to 18 and was also intended to take place across 2 days. However, unforeseen circumstances led the camp to last only 1 day. But despite the need to adjust everything so fast and reorganize a lot of camp, the first youth camp was actually a major success, and we learned a lot from this iteration. I think the biggest lesson was that kids need breaks, and they also need a lot of diverse activity types, so something a little different than what they're experiencing in school every day. So just before the second annual youth camp, Tribal Forestry program received funding by Project Learning Tree and Climb Time to host another teacher forestry education, and this was called Engaging Communities in Forestry Education. And similar to the first one, this was an opportunity for Central Washington school teachers to come to the reservation, learn about Yakama forest management, and also learn about a lot of these Project Learning Tree opportunities for students. So following Engaging Communities in Forestry Education, Tribal Forestry hosted its second annual youth camp. And this camp was intended for students aged 13 to 18 with the capacity to host 25 students over the course of 2 days. However, we ended up expanding the age range to be around 10 to 18. We took that feedback from 2024 and we incorporated breaks, we put hiking into the camp, and we really just gave students a wider variety of activities to engage with that are different than their traditional classroom activities. However, we noticed that the age gap was a challenge, so it was difficult to curate content to meet age-specific needs. So moving into 2026, we took all of that feedback from previous years and we really expanded on camp. So I'm really excited to announce that later this month, we'll be holding 2 sessions of camp. Each are 2 days with 15 students in each session, and the sessions are broken down by age group, where students aged 10 to 13 will participate in session 1, and students aged 14 to 18 will participate in session 2. The keys to success of youth camp is our partners and funding sources. So our programs are 638 contracted, and 2 of our programs do have the capacity for workforce development. The camp still kind of falls outside of the normal scope of work for these programs. So we've really relied heavily on a lot of funding from outside sources. And I have a lot of our funding sources listed on the slides if you want to take a look. Again, we just really thank these programs for their generosity in making youth camp a reality. Now I'm going to talk about some valuable collaborations in the next few slides. So like our funding, our collaborations have also been really key to making camp operational. So we'd first like to acknowledge the Yakama Nation Language Program for their contributions. So most of our content in our student workbooks was generously translated to Echishkin, including an extensive tree and cone guide. It was really a priority this year to incorporate the Yakama language into a lot of our camp operations, and just to kind of educate the students. It was about culture, but also for the staff. So far we've already noticed a big impact on the staff, and I can speak from personal experience. I introduced myself in Echishkin this earlier when I introduced myself to everyone, and that's something I've learned and something we plan to have all staff do to introduce themselves in Echishkin to the students later this month. Our extensive tree and cone guide is probably our largest resource for the students in our booklets, and the trees outlined in this guide are specific to the Yakama Nation Reservation, which it's the first of its kind. It's really cool. It's all of the trees you can possibly find in the reservation in extreme detail. And in addition, each species name is translated to Echishkin along with their scientific and common names. So in this example on the slide, we have tapash, which maybe some of you are familiar with that word. And that means ponderosa pine. There are extensive descriptions of their instance, their needles, their saw, their bark, and their pananik, their cones on the page, as well as a lot of maps and image of their extent. We would also like to acknowledge Project Learning Tree for providing curriculum that we've incorporated into the student activities. Project Learning Tree is evidence-backed curriculum and includes kind of like a blend of place-based knowledge, practical skills, and it adheres to a lot of the state standards. So we are extremely excited to see how implementing Project Learning Tree will go and what the students' feedback will be. If you are interested in exploring Project Learning Tree for your own program, there's a QR code on the slide that you can feel free to snap a picture of, and your state Project Learning Tree representative can be found through that link. And finally, we also collaborated with the local Toppenish School District to distribute flyers to middle school and high school age students. And this was kind of a process because kids in school districts, there's a lot of barriers you have to pass to distribute items, especially if it's not sponsored by the school. But we did all of that, and we have 2 flyers, one in Spanish and one in English. There are a lot of students in the valley that speak Spanish, so we're just trying to expand our reach as much as possible to everyone living in and around the reservation. Okay, so now that we have covered our history and our collaborations, I'm now going to give you a brief overview of camp itself and talk about the operational side of things. So camp this year, as I mentioned earlier, will take place across 4 days total, and there will be 2 days that are intended for students aged 10 to 13 and 2 days for students aged 14 to 18. Camp is open to both enrolled and unenrolled Yakamas, with the intention being to reach youth living in and around the reservation. Camp is located at the White Swan Forest Development Office and within the Yakama Nation Administrative Forest Boundary, which is a closed forest boundary. And camp teachers and support staff, as I mentioned earlier, are the tribal forestry staff themselves. And each staff involved with driving or transporting students hold valid permits. We also provide students with breakfast, lunch, and dinner, thanks to our generous donors. And all of the staff that are involved with handling food have valid Washington State food handlers licenses. Guardians are also required to sign waivers for photo and video release, just for future collaborations and presentations. And this form is given to them upfront, so parents are aware that their students might have pictures taken of them and can either approve that or deny that. Now, before talking about some operational decisions made for 2026, I'll first get into some of our outcomes from 2025. So in 2025, there were 26 students that were accepted and 19 students that attended. As you can see in the graphs, we ended up getting a lot of interest from mostly younger students, in 2025 especially, and we ended up expanding our age range, as I had mentioned earlier, to kind of accommodate that interest. We found in 2024 that there were more interest from male students, and in 2025 there was more interest from female students. It was kind of interesting. And there was also overall no overlap between all the students that we talked to. So that means across 2 years we reached 50 different students. Between both years, we received applications for mostly enrolled students. In 2025, there were 21 students who were enrolled Yakama or other tribe and 5 non-tribal students. 12 out of the 25 students had family who currently work for or had previously worked for tribal forestry. So one of our big goals is to still continue to attract those students that don't have any prior knowledge of forestry career pathways. One of our challenges from 2025 was creating age-appropriate content for a large age range. We addressed these challenges this year again by creating 2 camp sessions, and we're also hoping that this organization will encourage more high school age students to apply because they'll be surrounded by students similar age to them. We also wanted to run activities catering to the age groups present. So we used a combination of content developed by staff and also by Project Learning Tree, as I mentioned earlier, to ensure our activities are age appropriate and they line up with stuff that the students are learning in the classroom throughout the year. Additionally, we reformatted our daily structure of activities based on feedback from both students and teachers in 2025. So we're now incorporating a hike into each day instead of a whole day of hiking. And this hike is very strategically placed. So our first hike is kind of like an introduction to forestry. Students will learn how to view the forest like a forester. And then the final hike on the second day will be accumulation of everything they've learned about forestry, fire, fuels, and they'll be able to apply a lot of their knowledge through critical thinking activities. challenge faced was the availability of staff. So camp takes place in the heart of fire and field season, and our programs are heavily reliant on project funding, so it's really difficult to have a lot of staff available for camp, especially when firefighters need to be on call and the forestry staff need to be implementing their projects. So to address this challenge, we divided camp into 2 days, and each day is a different program's focus. So the first day is focusing on forest operations, and the second day will be a fire and fuels day. And this kind of works out. As well for knowledge base for the students because forestry is the foundation to fuels and fire. And additionally, we're really excited to incorporate Shishkin and Project Learning Tree to kind of blend cultural knowledge and known curriculum that has been proven to work. Another exciting concept that we came up for this year was the idea of creating booklets that kind of act as passports for students. So the idea is that students participate by asking questions, engaging with staff, and they'll be awarded these stickers, which kind of serve as like passport stamps. So as students travel from station to station, hike to hike, they get awarded these stickers based on their level of participation, and their participation will be awarded at the end through prizes. The passport system also allows us as staff to kind of understand where we're doing well and where we can maybe improve. The stickers will be labeled different colors, so we'll know in which program students are most engaged, in which stations they were most engaged, etc. So now I've been talking an awful lot about camp framework and curriculum, but you're probably curious exactly what this curriculum looks like and what activities we'll be doing with the students. So the first day of camp, which I mentioned earlier, is basically an introduction to forestry taught by forest operations staff. This day includes activities such as plot measurement, tree climbing and cone collection, and tree planting. So students will get first-hand experience collecting, monitoring plot data. Students will also have the opportunity to identify different forest health indicators, just to understand overall forest health. And they'll also witness certified tree climbers climb trees. Riley's a certified tree climber and will be helping out with that. And they will learn about the cone collection process. After learning about cone collection and seed propagation, they'll actually be able to plant their own trees. So on day 2, students will explore fire and fuels through a variety of demonstrations, one being a matchstick model demonstration. And the matchstick model kind of shows students on a small scale how fire moves through landscapes. So if you have a really dense stand, the fire will move really fast and it might turn into a crown fire versus treated forests, how fire moves differently. The students will interact also with fire gear. They'll have the chance to interact with an engine, and they'll get really hands-on experience with fire and fuels and understanding both programs. I also have a QR code listed on this slide for fireworks, which is the curriculum for the matchstick model that we'll be using. So if your program's also interested in doing something like that, feel free to scan that QR code. Like I mentioned earlier, we changed our hikes to include activities throughout the whole hike that involve critical thinking. So we're calling this Stop and Think hiking activities. And one highlight is our story of secondary succession. And it's inspired by Project Learning Tree's story of succession. And Project Learning Tree's story of succession is based on Mount St. Helens. So we kind of adapted that story to focus on the Cougar Creek wildfire, which was a massive wildfire in 2015 that hit the reservation pretty hard. And Pato, the Mount Adams, one of the mountains that a lot of the kids are really familiar with. And the Yakama Nation language program was really generous to translate a lot of the story. So we're really excited to show that to the kids and have them read it. And another Stop and Think activity includes natural history investigation that's planned to take place at the end of day 2 on the second hike. And this investigation will be led by students themselves, so they'll kind of have the opportunity to be leaders and kind of lead the whole discussion surrounding what happened in the forest that they're walking through. So looking ahead to the future of camp, we plan to continue to make it our priority to recruit youth on the reservation. and natural resource related fields. And we also hope to integrate emerging technologies into our programming, kind of evolving as technology evolves. And finally, we'd like to continue to strengthen our partnerships with local schools to broaden our outreach for camp. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to either of these emails